right now that employer and employee contribution, the actuary calculates what those two combined have to be, particularly for the employee and the employer contributions under 1 and 2. So it needs to be about 20%, 6% by the employee currently, and then it falls to that 14.09% for the employer. Just remind you, of course, KPERS 3 is a cash balance plan, still technically a defined benefit plan, but it has attributes of kind of like a 401k, where contributions go in by the employee and the employer over their lifetime. It's there, there's interest credits added to it, and then whatever's there in that, it's called a notational account. When the person gets ready to retire, that's annuitized or converted to a lifetime benefit. There is a higher retirement benefit then for the KPERS 3 member because they'll contribute more, so there'll be more money in that notational account that they'll contribute over their lifetime time of work. And so that normal cost, which is the cost for active service, that will increase because now those KPERS 3 members will be earning more in terms of a lifetime benefit. It does, as Melissa indicated, that once all the actuary has done all of her calculations, that employer contribution rate would go down from 14.09 to 13.25%, and based on that projected payroll of $4.9 billion, that 80.84% reduction in the employer contribution rate would result in about, in our calculations, about a $41.6 million reduction in all funds in fiscal year 2022. Once you start that, once you have those higher employee contribution rates, then correspondingly the employer contribution rate would continue on through the legacy of the unfunded actuarial liability. The administrative impact, that's something KPERS believe we could do within existing resources. Anyway, that's hopefully helpful to you. There's some written testimony that might also be helpful to the committee, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for the testimony, and I'll go directly to questions, although I think we have a four-legged friend that has had a lot of questions online, and if it would be possible to exclude them from the conversation when the partner of the four-legged friend does not have a question, would be mildly helpful. With that, committee questions? I have a couple just to walk through. I looked through the fiscal note a little bit with research, and you may have mentioned it, and I may have allowed myself to be distracted when you explained it, but is the rate that we're showing the rate for the state school group or just the school group at the 1409 and the reduction?
That is the state school group.
Okay, thank you. Then as I move through, I think the one benefit that I'm then changing is in Tier 3. Do benefits for Tier 1 and 2 stay the same?
Yes, well, I guess other than marginally, you know, KPERS 1 and KPERS 2, it does get to that final average salary calculation. So depending on their highest 3 or 4 years of service, if this increase in salaries, it would probably marginally help increase that. But of course, it depends on when that is and when that would be, if that would be reflected ultimately in their final average salary calculation. Okay. KPERS 3, it would for sure.
Okay, so that makes sense. A modest increase as I have a higher increase in salary over time would probably theoretically add 1.15% to the benefit by adding 1.15 in the contribution to salary.
Maybe not quite that strong. I guess just in general actuarial terms, employee contributions are worth slightly less than employer contributions because employee contributions can always be withdrawn. should the person terminate service, they can take their contributions with them prior to retirement. Of course, employer contributions, once they're in the trust fund, they stay in the trust fund.
So a couple of factors there, one being what could be withdrawn, and the other being the calculation of the final average salary value, both of which might help the employee.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Representative Proctor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when I looked at this bill before I came in here, it was not entirely clear to me the appropriations that allow for the pay increase to the CAPERS members in the school districts. So in my district, I've got 2 schools, and one of them is on Fort Leavenworth, and they get a sizable amount of federal money to compensate for the fact that they've got students that are military children and dependents, military dependents. There's a clawback that happens here in Kansas where that appropriation, the money that the state of Kansas gives the school district is reduced by something like 70% of that amount that they get federally. So I could not figure out if the amount of money that that school district would get would fully compensate the increase in salary. Is there any allocation made for that in the statute as it is?
Good question. I'm sure I don't know what all, and maybe Representative Highland might know.
If the revisor knows the answer to that, that would be very helpful. But I mean, it's not unique to Fort Leavenworth, right? Because
That's right.
or in and around Fort Riley and
Exactly.
at the Air Force Base.
Yep.
Thank you, Representative. A question, I believe, from Representative Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like a clarification. I think I know the answer to this, but I'm assuming there is no tax status impact on teachers. I realize that different individuals have different kinds of impacts, but I'm assuming that contributions made to CAPERS is not taxable income. Correct?
Yes, and this would not impact that in any way. And it, for Kansas income tax purposes, taxes are paid when it's going in. So when the individuals receive their CAPERS retirement benefit, they do not pay state income tax. Federal income tax is just the opposite. They don't pay federal income tax when it's going in, but when they do receive their CAPERS retirement, it is subject to federal income tax. But this law would not impact that current provisions one way or the other.
I appreciate that information. I think I vaguely knew that, but that's it's nice to have that underlined for me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So as we look through these, do we have a guesstimate of what the normal cost change would be for Tier 3? Given that we would increase the employee contribution, I don't know that we decrease the employer contribution in that the notional account is the 4% plus a percentage of the return on the portfolio on the rolling 5-year number, right?
Right. I think the normal cost change for CAPERS 3 would be about 0.21% is what, if I understood the numbers correctly, is 0.21% for the change.
So trying to get to that from the 1% increase in salary, then as we run that 1% or 1.15, as I run that through to a future value and bring that back, then that's the normal cost piece. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that information. And then from that, we could back in what an increase of Tier 3. Tier 3 is now 50% of our state school group of active employeds.
About CAPERS, about 40%, roughly.
40, okay.
39, yep.
So increasing the normal cost on that group well.
I was just going to say, and of course, an ever increasing size since it's the open group. So every year as people retire or new people join, they're joining, I mean, they're maybe leaving Capers 1 or 2, but the new hires would more than likely be in Capers 3.
Thank you. Early on, you mentioned the challenges that we had faced in other reforms where any change in contribution needs an offsetting benefit. And the Singer case might have been one that, do we have anything that shows if we give other consideration than increasing the benefit in the plan, how that might hold?
I'm not aware of any other Supreme Court cases. I don't know whether David is or not, but that's the one I think that our general counsel points to on a pretty regular basis, the Singer v. City of Topeka.
And looking at Singer, does it speak broadly enough to what we're doing with the increase in salary?
That I think might be more of a legal question. You know, is it a direct enough? The question probably is it a direct enough benefit? And I think that's, I guess, for policymakers and courts to decide.
Thank you. But no direct precedent to follow.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Thank you. Other questions? Representative Howe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Johnson. I had a question on the school group. Does that affect all public employees that are part of a school district, like support staff?
Let's see. I believe it does. Yes, that's right. That it's everybody in Capers schools, so support staff, yes, would, our understanding would be included.
Thank you, Representative. Other questions? And as we give a moment for other questions, Revisor Weiss, I'll have you be on deck for our Singer and related case. We'll flash back to you on that topic. Seeing no other questions at the moment. Thank you, Director Conroy. So with that, I'll flash back to Revisor Weiss, and the question was, the Singer case, does that speak broadly? Do we have some precedent outside of an increase in the corresponding benefit when we do an increase to contribution? And how might we consider that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. You know, the Singer case really kind of just the main holding of that is that, you know, if the state makes reasonable changes or modifications to the pension plan in which, you know, employees hold a vested contractual right, but the changes result in disadvantages to the employees, there must be, you know, an accompanying or, you know, offsetting or counterbalancing advantage. That's kind of the language they use in Singer. I'm not aware, at least in Kansas or even in other jurisdictions, I'm not aware of like an attempt of this particular nature to do the salary increase, and then whether or not that would constitute, you know, sort of that offsetting advantage with the slightly higher, you know, final average salary or those type of things, whether or not that would satisfy the test in Singer. Like I said, I think it's sort of a lot of this becomes sort of a factual determination as the court examines, you know, the particular modifications and then the disadvantages versus the advantage. And there's no real, like Alan said, there hasn't been any real definitive guidance from the court on that, but beyond that, there does appear to be the need for some sort of offset when you go in and modify, you know, the vested contractual rights of the pension plan.
Thank you. So with that, we will move to our proponent testimony. And for that, we have Representative Ron Highland. Welcome to committee.
Thank Mr. Chairman, may I remove my mask? Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me this time to come in and speak to you about this bill. Several years ago, while I was on appropriations and tax, and Mr. Conroy came in and gave his presentations, I became very interested in the CAPER system. It's fascinating. Since then, every year I have read their annual report and visited with Mr. Conroy. He's my hero on this. But back then, it became apparent to me there are 5 different groups within the CAPER system. And on that, in my testimony, you have the chart. And this CAPER school part of it, the school teachers had their own retirement system until in the early 70s, I believe. And at that point, they went underwater and the state took it over. And they have never really caught up in our system since that time. So that has concerned me. So I came up with this idea in this bill. And then the law that we've been talking about, the legal case, it said that if the teachers increase their input, then they have to be compensated. And so we just said, well, let's make it equal. What you're putting in will equalize it with your salary. And so that's where it all started from. The CAPER system, the unfunded liability is an important issue because it will affect the bond rating for our state. And there was a period of time in the early 2000s where that became apparent and our bond rating was reduced because of our unfunded liability. And we have put a lot of money into the CAPER system since that time to bring it up to a point where our bond rating has now elevated to where we are today. The teachers portion, and I visited with a lot of teachers across the state. And I explained to them their system, where they fit in the entire system. And as you can see, their unfunded liability now is 60%, over 60% of the entire unfunded liability. And that holds the whole system down. Now, it's a lot healthier it was than just a few years ago. But it's still a situation where they became concerned when they had all the facts and they said, we're willing to participate. So, and that was the impetus for all of this. I also, in discussing all this, I said, you know, that there's a situation that goes on here, whether it's the legislature or the governor. The money that's put into this every year is one of those things that can be fiddled with. You can either delay the payments or all kinds of things. And so I'm saying here, I'd like to see this be a mandate where these payments are made into the system and skirt around that ability for the legislature or the governor to stick their fingers into that pie, so to speak. So with that, I'll stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Questions, committee? I will start. So thanks. I think I got the key goal was to increase the certainty of payments into the system. Did I catch that correctly?
Yes, my final statement, yes.
Okay. Were there some others that I missed along there?
No, I just, the other key point is that we wanted to reduce the unfunded liability, the portion that the school systems have in the system. One of the 5, and they're the least funded. That's the 2 main points.
Okay, so walk me through again how, other than, so I get the certainty of the funding, how do I reduce that faster in this scenario?
Well, by increasing the employee and by, in turn, the employer's contributions, their piece of the pie will shrink. Their unfunded liability portion will shrink over the years. It's not going to be immediate, but it will catch them up, and they're paying at this rate, they're at the same level as the Kansas Fire and group. So it brings them up to a level where they're kind of equal with the rest of the employees of the state.
Thank you. So let me run through that fiscal note to make sure I had a good handle on it. I take roughly 40 million from the general fund. I increase that to schools for salaries. those salaries then offset the increased contribution for 40 million from the teachers, which goes into capers. Have gone from the state to the school to the teacher to capers, right? And then that reduces the required contribution by the state by about 30 million, right?
That's the way I heard the
Doesn't go in.
testimony, yes.
So I have a change in the flavor of the contribution with a smaller change, the net being around 10 million more that the state still puts in after running the money through the employee, which achieves a certain, because you're right, the employee payments are made. Those go in. The employer side is the one that has the fluctuation. So did I miss anything on that?
No, sir, I think that's it.
Okay. So I do accomplish that. The other thing that I had mentioned, I know you had vetted this in terms of the, does the increase in salary give us the legal standing that we need for the increase in employee contribution?
When I asked that question of the attorneys downstairs, they said equal probably is close you're going to get, but nobody knows for sure until you end up in a court of law what the going to be a decision. But equal, I think, would meet that test in most cases.
Thank you. Other questions, committee? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Doctor, thank you for being here. As an outsider, I never realized there were 4 groups of capers, 5 groups of capers. And, you know, I really, having a lot of friends that are teachers, there's a perception that the state is not for, you know, teachers in their retirement. But do they realize that the state bailed them out in 1971? They would have went bankrupt without the state?
Those in my age group do, but beyond that, no.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah, like when they defer a payment, I told people they're not taking anything out of capers. They're just deferring the payment. And like I say, there's a lot of questions out there. So thank you, Doctor. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, there's a lot of emotion goes into that discussion when you talk about deferring payments and everything.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for the testimony and walking me through how everything follows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, is there anyone else wishing to appear as a proponent of House Bill 2044? Seeing none, we will move to our opponent testimony. And first, I have Terry Forsyth with KNEA. Terry, welcome to committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, thank you for letting me speak today on House Bill 2044. I'm Terry Forsyth. I'm the Director of Political Advocacy for KNEA.
We may have just lost you, Terry. Between that signals technology and the rolling blackouts, we know where. Oh, is Terry back? Okay.
Hello?
All right, Terry, back to you. We got that opening statement, and that was as far as we made it.
I'm sorry. My wireless and my computer hookup is very thin right now. I will do my best to go quickly. We are opposed to 2044 with KNEA. We believe that it's a complicated potential fix for a very simple problem. If you're going to have a situation where you have a lot of moving parts, you're going to have a situation where you have a lot of unintended consequences. This bill has lots of moving parts to get the money from point A to point B. Our position would be, please, just if you're going to save 10 million, put 30 million more into capers and the deal is done. Otherwise, for those of us, and so many of you do not know me, I've been working with KNEA and pensions for about 20 years. One of the pieces of legislation that we've worked on over and over again was working after retirement. We tried to get it right. We wanted to do it right. It took many, many, many years because of so many moving parts. If you don't have to have the moving parts, then make it simple. Go from point A to point B and you're done. Otherwise, you're complicating a problem that doesn't need to be complicated. Also, on the equity portion between the two systems, if you pay in and you get out, the system doesn't work like that. 1.5% increase is taxed by the federal government as it goes into the teacher's salaries, and it's taxed year after year. Now, the salary, 1.5% is for 1 year. It doesn't go in after that. So you have a number of problems this way that, as far as we're concerned. If you want a simple solution, just put in more money directly into the system. And I would be happy to stand for questions at the proper time, and I do apologize about my connection.
I think we take advantage of the connection at the moment if anyone has questions. Representative Smith.
I have 4 children in public education, so it means a lot to me. But the society as a whole, aren't we expected, like my son, who works for a multi-million-dollar company, he pays 5%, his company pays 5%. And I said, son, why don't you put 2% more in there? But isn't that what our society is asking us to do right now? We're asking for the employer to pay his share, but we're asking the employee to pay a little bit more on the society as a whole. Don't you see that coming?
Representative Smith, I appreciate your comment. I would tell you that there's a trail of tears, so to speak, with pensions and teachers. Initially, you heard that the teachers fund was going under and it was rescued by the state. The reason the teachers fund was going under previously was because it was underfunded by the state and by others. The CAPERS itself has been underfunded by the legislature for over 22 years. It was in the last year that it was funded on a correct level. So teachers over the years have put in their fair share amount. It was the legislature that never put in their fair share amount by statute. The actuary said it would need to be X amount of money to be viable. The legislature put in statute that they couldn't even give that much money. So for 22 years, the legislature underfunded the pensions. And so, yeah, the teachers have paid in their fair share amount year after year after year. The legislature did not do that until the last 2 years. I think that while people don't mind stepping up, at this time where teachers are under a great amount of stress, where schools are doing their best to proceed with education, to add another wrinkle to the teacher, saying we're going to ask you to pay in more, we're going to give you more, but we're going to ask you to pay in more. That's not something they're going to understand right now. All they know is, wow, another change, and I'm in the midst of a pandemic. And I would ask you to at least vote no this year. Consider it, take another look, because in the future, there might be another way of doing this. I don't believe very sincerely that this is the way to do it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions, committee? Former representative asked most of my questions, and what I just was wanting to get that sense that you just mentioned, Mr. Forsyth, that one of the challenges, even though everything coming through is the same, is it's hard to explain the change. Somewhat it's the timing, but getting folks to embrace that change and realize that they're as well off afterwards as they were before, is that one of the main concerns that I was hearing you address?
That would be it, yes.
Thank you. And then you mentioned something to the offsetting benefit, but are those questions best left for the attorney that's following you on the agenda?
I would suppose so.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony, and the link all but worked perfectly. So Good deal. Our next opponent, Kimberly Vogelsberg, also with the KNEA, and I see attorney next to her name. So we'll get to maybe go a little deeper on that. Thank you and welcome to committee.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Kimberly Strite Vogelsberg, and I am the staff attorney with the Kansas National Education Association. I represent many teachers and other employees of public school districts across the state, but prior to working with KNEA, I practiced family law and criminal law, and in that work, I've heard clients tell me many times that something is not fair. So one of the hard parts of my job as an attorney is telling clients that what feels unfair is actually legal. But in this case with HB 2044, if I have teachers tell me that this seems unfair, I'm in the position to tell them, yes, it is unfair and it is also not legal. Our United States Constitution, through the Contracts Clause, prevents that injustice that HB 2044 would impose on them. The Contracts Clause prohibits the government from passing any law that impairs the obligation of contracts. So as the representative, I think Smith was it, said, if you put in 5%, the employer puts in 5% and you get a benefit calculated from that. The government can't go in and change that deal. Here with HB 2044, they are changing that deal by passing a law that would increase that employee contribution. That's a problem because even if that money is made up on the back end, which I'm not sure that it is in every case, but even if the benefit is increased by that same amount of 1.15%, the employee doesn't get to use that money in the meantime. And the reason that the original deal was, in the former example, was equal shares, and now the employee percentage is up and the employer contribution is not. So that's a problem. If my dad always pays his electricity bill on the last day possible because he doesn't want somebody using his money. And I think most people can see the logic in that. And I think our members also feel that way. The other problem that we have is the income tax problem. As it was mentioned, you are in the state income taxes charged on that. So even if we kind of move the money around and try to make employees whole by giving them an increased salary, they're going to have to pay income taxes on that. The increased salary might even bump them up a bracket and cause them to have a higher tax rate. And giving them that income is also going to be problematic because, as most of you know, the teachers, public school districts often negotiate salaries. And when we have another factor coming in about money, just as it was mentioned before with a clawback related to federal taxes, anytime, and as Terry said, when there's more moving parts, that's true. When we have more things to deal with in a negotiation, it makes it much more difficult to say whatever the new salary that is granted to teachers by the district, how do we make sure that they're getting the full increase that this bill appropriates? The other problem is that this appropriation is only made for one fiscal year. What happens in future fiscal years? Do we have to do this process each year? That's a lot of uncertainty for teachers and for our members. So those are some of the problems that we see, and that is why I think that the Singer case, which has been mentioned, where in that case the participants were required to pay an additional 4% in contributions with no change in benefits, was found to be violating of the balancing test. It did not pass that test, and I don't think that this case would pass. This bill would pass that test either. So I would recommend to our members that there is a remedy that the law provides, and the Contracts Clause would provide a good basis for a lawsuit. So I think to avoid all of that we would be better off for our members and for the state of Kansas. For those reasons, we would oppose the bill. If there's questions on that, I would be happy to answer.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us. Our first question, Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad that you mentioned lawsuits because that kind of gets at the question I was going to ask. So right now, the legislature's kind of in the midst of a settlement on school funding that's supposed to up, the school budget every year by another, I believe, $100 million, give or take 10 million. Would this money, if this bill did pass, would this money come out of that total, or would this be on top of that 100,000, give or take, each year that we're supposed to be increasing the funding for schools by?
I don't think I can answer that with certainty, but it seems to me that it would be on top of that. If it's supposed to be an offsetting balance, I think it would need to be on top of that because this money wouldn't be going into schools. It would be directly to attempt to offset teacher salaries and the increased contribution. But again, for the reasons I've stated, I'm not sure that it even does that.
Thank you. And I'm not sure either, Representative, if the CAPERS contributions are counted towards the lawsuit monies or not. I should remember that, but I'm not sure. If they are, then we should wind up in essentially the same spot, and if not, a difference. So the point that we had been asking did deal with, okay, in year one, it looks like we have an offsetting benefit, but whether it counts, we don't know about. But it sounds like the other question is, in the Singer case and others, when there is an increase in the contribution and there's an increase in the contractual obligation, those are more generally considered to balance than when there's an increase in the contribution and there's an increase in a allocation to the compensation. Am I catching one of the key variances that you were pointing out?
I think, are you asking me if there's the balances between the employee and the employer contributions?
Not quite. I was just looking at the fact that if I increase employee contributions, I have to have that offsetting benefit. And if I increase them contractually for the pension, and if I increase contractually the pension benefit, those two hang together pretty neatly. Yes. But when I do the salary, while we could look with confidence in the first year that we actually did have an equal and offsetting benefit, that might be harder to sustain over time to, even if we got it done. First, did we get it done? And second, can we show that?
Yes, I think you're exactly right. That would be hard and it wouldn't be as certain. Therefore, I think that's going to cause problems with the Singer test because it's not built into the CAPERS contract. You would be dependent on that appropriation each year. And also, as I said, I think it's going to be hard to calculate that money because teacher salaries change. They're all at different levels on their pay scale. And so to calculate that number each year when negotiations usually aren't done until after the legislative session ends, I think it'd be difficult just from a practical standpoint as well.
So on other hypothetical questions, knowing that is one sticky wicket, let's say that this is enacted and we do pretty well going down the road and the 1.15 is added to salaries. Is it possible that employees could bring their case against the state saying, I got an increase, but I think my 1.15 came from something else and not from what was done for the CAPERS piece? Is that something that we could potentially face?
Yes. You know, when people ask if there's a lawsuit, there's always a lawsuit. Somebody could always sue. It's just whether or not it's going to be successful. So yes, the potential for litigation certainly exists. And as I'm sure you're aware, even defending a suit that you eventually win or settle is still very expensive.
Thank you. Other questions? Representative Miller.
First, I think we need to make sure the record reflects the proper spelling of her name. I think we've got a couple of letters transposed.
Wouldn't be the first ones.
Secondly, I like that answer because I used to give that answer all the time. 100% of my clients would ask, can I sue? And I would say, sure. And they'd smile. And I'd say, that doesn't mean you're going to win. Anybody can sue.
Correct.
Ms. Vogelsberg, you cite Singer. Is that case exhaustive on this subject, or are you aware of other cases?
I think it's the most on point Kansas case that we have. I think it would be the controlling case. There's other cases out of state that we could look to for guidance, but I think this is the case when we're talking about Kansas case law.
You may be absolutely correct, but could you provide us with other citations? And I'm going to ask the revisor, not at this moment, but when testimony is done, what his opinion is on the legal issue. And I would ask Representative Highland or anyone that can answer the question if we know whether the Attorney General has opined in this area. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for the testimony.
Thank you.
Our next opponent is Ernie Claudel with the Kansas Coalition of Retired School Personnel and the Kansas Coalition of Public Retirees. Ernie, welcome to committee.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman Johnson and members of the committee for hearing my testimony. Besides being involved in lobbying for the two groups you mentioned, I do have a disclaimer here I need to offer. As an elected member of the Capers Board of Trustees, the position expressed in this testimony represent my views and or the views of the coalition and CARSP, and they do not in any way represent the views of Capers Board of Trustees, nor do I speak to them, for them. My area of concern are twofold, and since the legal part has been discussed thoroughly, for a lack of a better term, I want to talk about what I call the moral part of this. As was mentioned previously, this is a bad time to be pouring any more weight or concern on the teachers' shoulders. We also are aware that the retirement of teachers is probably going to go up, exacerbating the teacher shortage, and we don't need to do anything that adds confusion to the retirement system, because the retirement system is one of the benefits that cause people to go into the public service, and this is well documented. Now then, in 1962, the Capers was initiated, and in 71, the legislature joined the old Capers, the old school retirement system and Capers together. Under the requirements of the statute, whenever this takes place, whenever a group is brought into Capers, they're supposed to be funded fully. Actually, as it happened, from 1971 to 1982, the legislature did put in extra money, which was earmarked for that purpose, and then they quit. This is the reason why the Capers funds are, the Capers School Fund is underfunded. The trust fund for them is more underfunded. So this is a second time, and this is why CARSP and KCPR have always used the argument that we have been underfunded twice, being that when the regular Capers was underfunded on top of the shortfall that had come before this. And it just dawned on me while I was sitting here listening to this testimony that somehow the teacher should be responsible for this. It dawned on me that probably the teachers were responsible and gained most of the benefit from this changeover are probably no longer with us. Also, we've got a situation here where this is apparently a net situation where the teachers are paying in more, but the way the system is set up and according to statute, then the employers will be paying less. So once again, it's like you're trying to tax with this bill is trying to tax and penalize somebody who is in no way in fault in this. Once again, singled out. It also came to my attention because I've seen this happen before, particularly because everybody under the Caper school situation is involved in this. Some of these people are not high income earners, and it's very likely that their take-home pay would go down because this raise could be well shift them into another tax bracket. I have been involved in a case in the past where a blanket $100 raise did this, caused people to actually come home with less take-home pay. Another concern is this only, as I understand it, this only allows for the raise for 1 year, but the increased contribution goes on for longer, forever, I guess. And this is real concerning, and it's not one of those cases that it's not fair or you're taxing somebody who is not in any way in fault for this. I should also say that I have talked across the state since 2004 to teachers about this, and I have never heard anybody think that was a good idea that they contribute more. To me, this looks like running around the barn and winding up at the same place. Finally, one legal aspect that I think hasn't been mentioned yet. If it was, I missed it, and I would apologize for that. But I believe the salaries of the teachers and staff of the schools are determined by the local school boards. Like I said, the comments I had on the legal have already been covered. And so I would stop there and be happy to stand for questions if anyone has some.
Thank you. Questions, committee? So just a couple of things to, I think I caught it, most of the points that you had. The question being, you know, as we went around the barn, we wind up largely in the same place, but not quite. So there are a couple of differences that we wanted to point out. One of the benefits that was pointed out is there is more certainty of those payments going in when they are from the employee, all other things being equal. But concerns that you had were, is it equal? So I was just trying to think through, if I make $50,000 and my pay is increased by 1.15%, that's $575 in a year, that in theory my salary goes up, and then I pay that $575 into capers. So that net is the same. But we were talking about the tax piece earlier, so perhaps if $575 is taxable to Kansas, is that right? I do pay Kansas tax, but not federal. So I would owe Kansas income tax on that $575, and whatever that is, I might wind up that much behind once I didn't quite get all the way around the barn. I was just a foot or so from the door because of the state income tax piece on that. But perhaps there are other things. I'm trying to think of other things that, and again, a lot of moving pieces to try and get a handle on. Are those the things that you were thinking of, and is there more that I may be missing?
No, I would just reiterate that it seems like the idea behind this, as stated in testimony, that was to get the teachers caught up. None of these people that are presently working for the school districts had anything to do with being behind in the first place. That they were not, the statute was not followed initially. And so the initial retirement system did not come in fully funded. And now, once again, they're being asked to pay more money for something that they had no fault in. And then another thing that I just came up with today and I hadn't thought of before is I think that most of the people that were involved in that originally, and that affected originally, you could say, because they were part of that original group, are probably no longer with us. So you're asking people to doubly pay for something they had nothing to do, had no responsibility for, or no fault in.
Thank you. Further questions, committee? And you pointed out your history is always deep on this, and we'll have to tease the legislators and governor from 1982 for stopping that 10 million payment. So that would have sure made it easier. So thank you for the testimony.
Thank you.
Next, we have Jerry Henn, United School Administrators of Kansas. Thank you for coming and patiently waiting through committee.
Now it's on. There we go. Thank you, committee. I appreciate the time, and it's really nice to be towards the end because everybody else has hit all your points. So that's a positive. I guess some of the things that I would like to point out is that I am representing USA Kansas and KASB at the same time. So we both went together on this testimony. The things that I'm probably going to hit more is going to be talking more about the 1.15% and the 7.15%. And Representative Johnson, I will kind of bring up your example of 50,000. I did it on 70, I just picked 70,000. If you take that 1.15% on a $70,000 salary, you end up at $805. If you do that on 6%, which it currently is at, that turns out to be a $4,248 per year on 6%. If you do that at 7.15% on that $70,805, it turns out to be over $5,000, which is a difference of $814. Now, my point is that the $805 that would have been the raise on the 1.15% is now the employee is paying $814 and some odd cents. So they're paying a little bit more money. In the end, they will get that money back, probably out of capers, but at the time, it's more money. So the teacher is going to be looking at, or the, excuse me, not teacher, the educational employee is going to be looking at having to pay in a few more dollars in the end. But that it's a very small amount, but it is something that I think needs to be pointed out. The other thing I mean, we've already talked about the higher tax brackets, local salaries, we've already control. The only other thing that I think I would like to point out is what Mr. Claudel had said as well, is that the teaching, with people retiring, teachers are becoming harder and harder to find. The retirement system is one of those major positives in education. So I have large concerns about if this goes up and teachers have to pay more into it, there's a possibility to have more openings. So everything else has been touched on, so I'm going to stop right there and thank the committee.
So thank you. Committee questions? I'd like to go around the numbers that you had again.
Sure.
You went.
Sure.
So essentially, I went from an 805 increase to 814 paid out on the 70,000 example. I was trying to get there because I actually would come up with a bigger variance if I looked at state income tax on those dollars. And then in some cases, when I'm not at the Social Security threshold,
Yes.
if Social Security would also create some impact. So I was trying to actually get why there was only that $9 difference. I figured we might be pushing 50.
There would be, Representative. I did not figure in any type of state income tax or Social Security. I just went straight for capers information.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so straight through the capers information. So by increasing the total and then the percent on it, I actually have a small variance, just the way the math works out.
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct, yes.
I hadn't followed through doing the full calculation. Yep. So anyway, so thank you for that.
Sure.
I appreciate it. Probably no one else did, but I appreciate getting to go through the numbers. So any other questions, committee? Seeing none, I'll quit asking them and save everyone else the pain of me doing that, but thank you for your testimony. Committee, I have a couple of others that I have listed as written, and I will mention those briefly. Is there anyone else wishing to appear as an opponent on 2044? Seeing none, I'll direct our attention to the testimony from Michael Scribner and Sarah LaFrenz, and I may have mispronounced her name, with Keeping the Kansas Promise Coalition and AFT Kansas, respectively. Is there anyone wishing to appear neutral on 2044? And anyone else at all? Seeing none, we will close the hearing. So thank you. Representative Miller. Oh, you had a question before I closed that hearing, didn't you? So your question, if you would direct that, I apologize and retract my earlier statement. We'll continue.
And I think it is pronounced Sarah. My question for David is, have you had a chance to review Singer, and do you agree with distinguished counsel that it's controlling on in the context of this bill?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I have Singer, I've reviewed Singer, and I have it, in fact, pulled up right now. I think in regard to, that is probably the leading case when we talk about increased employee contributions. This is probably the most, at least in the Kansas line of cases, the most, on point case. I mean, of course, always factual distinction. That was a 3% up to a 7% increase, of more than double, versus, something like a 6 to 7.15. But in regards to employee contribution increases and how that impacts the contractual clause analysis, I think Singer is probably your closest bet in the Kansas case law.
So I take it then that you would agree with her conclusion that this bill would likely be found to be unconstitutional?
Well, I don't want to start
no,
speaking
I know you don't
towards
want
the
to, but
unconstitutional.
that's why you're our attorney, to give us your opinion.
Well, like I said, my opinion on this is that there would be concerns, I think, at least with regard to, as was brought up, that the increased salary, the appropriation piece in this bill would have, I think, would need to continue forward through the legislative process. If not, there would probably be concerns with the under the Singer line of cases, whether or not there are any sort of counterbalancing advantages to this increased contribution disadvantage.
Okay, that's as close as I would expect. Thank you, David. I appreciate your forthrightness.
Thank you. We have a couple of other questions, but I want to actually ask that same question just to continue to make it be painful. And if cases were brought against us through that, what would we need to show the specificity, and how complicated would it be to show that that 1.15 that we had in the budget was indeed the offset that was there and wasn't due to some other complicating factor in the school funding formula?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that would be, I think that'd have to be a factual determination that would be done probably within the court, probably the trial court level, if the lawsuit was brought. How the state would have to prove that 1.15 is specifically the CAPERS increase for this to offset or so kind of in effect subsidize the increased employee contribution rate. I mean, I think there would be, some factual determinations that have to be brought forth at a trial, and to show that those is the corresponding benefit or offset to the increased contribution rate. But there would be some work to be done, I suppose.
So thank you. So I'll just summarize that you would be excited to have the chance to work that case. But thank you for the information. Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is also for the reviser. I'd like to ask you the same question that I asked Director Conroy at the beginning. Does this bill speak to the methodology for allocating the funds per school district, and would those funds be subject to that 70% clawback or decrement that we do to schools for federal funds for military dependent students?
Yes, that's a very good question, Representative. The bill does not speak specifically to that within how it gets allocated to the various districts and those specific examples, like on Fort Leavenworth, Fort Riley. I don't know if would be the best to answer that, because I don't think the bill gets into that kind of specificity, and but there would be, I think, some additional, kind of determinations for district by district, how the money would get allocated. But that we'd probably have to go through. That's why the money does go through the Department of Education. They would probably have to utilize their existing procedures to try to figure that out, district by district.
Thank you both. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I wanted to ask you, if we charge the employees 1.15% more and they got a 1.15% raise, we said in that 1 year, how much money would the state be better off?
Well, that may be a better question for the fiscal note, but my recollection, and I'll have Melissa oversee what I say, I don't know that there's a better off for the state. It sounded like that 1.15% by the payroll is $40 million, and that $40 million would then go from the state to the schools for the schools to pay as an increased salary. And that would be offset by the employees paying 1.15, also 40 million into CAPERS. Then on the back side, there is a reduction to what is paid as the actuarial rate is reduced from that 14.09 to the 13.25. And that was estimated to save the state 30 million. So on the front, I pay 40, and after I work it through the system, it's expected that I'd get a reduction of 30, which would be a net increase of 10 million from the state as we went around. So there would be a mild, while 10 million is a lot of money, it's not a lot of money relative to the UAL, so it would be a mild increase to CAPERS. Melissa, did I butcher that completely?
No, I think you've explained it very well. The Fiscal Note is most interested in what happens to the employer contribution rate, since that is a rate that has been certified for fiscal year 22, and you have explained the net impact well.
So did that
Thank
make
you,
it
Mr.
perfectly clear, Representative Smith?
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for any of our conferees that we have or each other? Seeing none, thanks everyone for their patience and our conferees for their testimony, and we will close that hearing. Hang on for just one quick minute. Representative Croft and I were trying to decide how excited you would be to spend the next 12 minutes going over the mandate process and the approval process, which is something we have intended to do, but we are thinking that based on the challenges with technology, et cetera, that we will save that for our next meeting as well. So with that, is there anything else for the good of the committee? Obviously, everyone who's on still has power. I hope you continue to have that. And whenever your travels bring you to Topeka, do be safe. Thanks to all. We are adjourned.